What happens when the most powerful man in the room realizes he's the one who's been living small? When a father obsessed with control watches a woman the world ignores lift his son not with strength, but with permission? And how does a single dance step become the turning point for a life ruled by silence, shame, and fear? This isn't just a story about disability. It's not just about race. It's about who sees who, and what happens when we choose to move, not in front of someone, but beside them. Langston W. Holt wasn't used to being surprised. At 53, he was the CEO of one of the largest private equity firms on the East Coast. He had 3 homes, 2 jets, and 1 son, Ellie, born premature, diagnosed with spastic diplegia by age 3. Doctors said he might never walk. Langston made sure he did, with the best therapists, custom orthotics, and a full-time staff. Everything was managed, scheduled, funded, optimized, but nothing was felt. At home, Eli rarely spoke. At school, he rarely smiled. And lately, even with all his progress, he had stopped trying altogether. Langston didn't talk about that part. He just hired another specialist. Until one Thursday afternoon, he came home early, and his housekeeper said something that made him pause. "Sir, I think you should know." Eli asked to go somewhere today. Not to the clinic, not to the doctor. He asked to go to the studio. The studio. "Yes," she said gently. "The one where they dance." Langston didn't like surprises. But this time, he got in the car, and what he saw next would break something in him, and then rebuild it entirely. Tasha didn't have much, but what she had she gave. 6 days a week. She worked double shifts at a small cafe tucked between a dry cleaner and an abandoned pharmacy in the south end of the city. It wasn't fancy. The coffee tasted burnt. The chairs wobbled. And the tips, well, they were never enough. But she kept showing up, because she had rent to pay, because her mother's prescriptions weren't getting cheaper, because her little sister still dreamed of college. And maybe, just maybe, because there was still a part of her that believed in something more. At night, when her apron was off and her sneakers were sore, she walked 4 blocks down to a little community dance studio. It wasn't much chipped mirrors, scuffed floors, and a sound system that crackled when the bass dropped. But it was where she could breathe. Tasha had been dancing since she was 7. Not ballet, not jazz, but life. She danced grief into rhythm. She turned worry into movement. It was the only place where her body felt free, even when everything else was weighed down. And sometimes when she could, she stayed late to help with the kids' class. Not as a teacher, just a helper. Sweeping the floor, tying little shoes, offering quiet encouragement. That's where she saw him for the first time. A small boy in a gray hoodie, sitting by himself near the back of the room. His legs were stiff. His hands fidgeted. His eyes, a piercing kind of blue, barely looked up. He didn't speak, didn't move. But he watched, like he wanted to join, but didn't know how to ask. At first, Tasha just waved at him. Then, the next day, she brought an extra juice box. On the 3rd day, she asked, "You like music?" The boy nodded almost imperceptibly. She crouched beside him, her voice gentle. "You don't have to know the steps," she said. "You just have to feel the beat. Want to try with me?" He hesitated. Then, slowly, reached out his hand, and just like that, he took the lead. Not with a turn, not with a spin, but with a choice. The choice to try. The choice to trust? Tasha didn't guide him. She followed. She didn't know his last name. She didn't know who his father was. She just saw a boy trying, and that was enough. But across town, in a glass tower lined with chrome and silence, someone else was watching. And he didn't like what he saw. Not yet. Eli Holt wasn't supposed to be fragile. Not with a father like his. He was born 7 weeks early. 3 pounds, 5 ounces. The doctor said he might not walk, he might not speak. He'll need help probably for life. Langston's response, "Build the help?" By Eli's 2nd birthday. There was a full-time staff, speech therapist, physical therapist, occupational therapist. By age 5, he had robotic leg braces from Sweden. By 8, he had a custom hydrotherapy pool. By 10, a nutritionist and a yoga coach. What he didn't have was his father. Langston paid. He scheduled. He checked results. He made decisions, but he rarely made time. He told himself that love looked like effort, like spreadsheets and solutions, like pushing for progress, even when Eli cried. Because crying, that was weakness. And in Langston's world, weakness had no place. At school, Eli kept his head down. He was the boy with the braces, the careful steps, the quiet voice. He didn't join recess. He didn't go to birthday parties. When the class danced during music, he just watched his body still, his fingers twitching in the air like they were trying to remember a rhythm he had never learned. Other kids didn't mock him. They simply ignored him, which, in many ways, hurt more. At home, he spent hours in silence, in a room with the best tech money could buy. But no laughter, no mess, no one to say, "That's okay, try again." Until one day, he saw a flyer taped to the community board near the cafe. It read, "Free movement class for all kids. No judgment, just joy." He didn't ask permission. He just pointed at the flyer during his ride home and whispered, "I want to go." The housekeeper blinked. It was the first full sentence she had heard from him in weeks. Langston didn't notice. Not at first. He had a quarterly call with Singapore, a board dinner at the Carlisle, an inbox that never reached zero. But then came the message, a small note on his calendar from the housekeeper. "Eli at studio, 4:30 p.m. Asked to go." Langston stared at it for a long time. He didn't like the unknown, didn't like when things moved without his direction. What kind of studio? What kind of people? Was it safe? Was it supervised? He told himself it was probably just a curiosity, something Eli would try once and forget. But something maybe guilt. Maybe instinct made him get into his car that day. No driver. No security. Just him? He wanted to see for himself. What he didn't know was that what he'd find inside that small, echoey room would break the silence he had built for years and show him a kind of love he had never been brave enough to give. The parking lot was cracked and uneven. A single flickering light buzzed above the door of the studio, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. This wasn't the kind of place Langston Holt usually entered. He hesitated before stepping out of the car. The engine hummed behind him like it didn't want him to leave. His shoes clicked sharply on the concrete polished. Expensive, completely out of place. Inside, the studio smelled like old wood and lavender detergent. Laughter echoed faintly from the back room. And then music, not classical, not jazz. Just a soft, steady rhythm, something simple, familiar. He walked past a row of worn-out shoes and a wall lined with faded photos. Children, smiling, moving. Langston's footsteps slowed as he reached the doorway. And there he was. Eli, not sitting, not silent, not hiding. He was in the center of the room. His back was straight. His hands were raised. His face calm, focused, almost glowing. And in front of him, moving with gentle intention, barefoot on the wooden floor, was a young woman, Tasha. She wasn't leading. She was waiting, letting him choose the next step, letting him guide the pace. Eli took a slow, stiff step forward. She mirrored him. He lifted an arm. She matched it, not correcting, not rushing, just following. The other kids circled them with small claps, encouraging shouts, and a rhythm that pulsed like a heartbeat. And then Eli smiled. Not the polite smile he gave in family photos. Not the half smile he used to get through awkward school events. A real smile. Full. Open. Alive. Langston gripped the edge of the doorway. He couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't understand how this was happening. His son, his fragile, guarded, broken little boy was moving with joy. With rhythm. With freedom. And the woman, the one in faded leggings and a t-shirt with a coffee stain near the collar. She wasn't teaching him. She was trusting him, letting him be the one in control. Something Langston had never done. He stepped back. His pulse thundered in his ears. This wasn't therapy. This wasn't scheduled. This wasn't what he had approved. He didn't even know this woman. Didn't sign a waiver. Didn't write a check. And yet Eli was dancing. Langston's instinct was to interrupt, to assert control, to protect his son from something he couldn't explain. But he didn't. Because in that moment, for the first time in a very long time, he wasn't sure who needed protecting. His son, or his own image of him. He left without saying a word, but the image haunted him. The rhythm, the smile, the outstretched hand not leading, but inviting. That night, in his penthouse apartment overlooking the city skyline, Langston stared at a silent dining table set for two and realized he didn't even know what his son's laugh sounded like anymore, but someone else did, and she had heard it without ever needing to raise her voice. Langston returned the next evening. Not with anger, not with questions, just curiosity. He waited outside the studio, leaning against his car, watching through the front window. The music was slower this time, softer. The lights were dimmer. Inside, Eli was sitting on the floor. Cross-legged, he was laughing. The sound cracked something in Langston's chest. It had been so long since he heard it. He wasn't even sure he remembered it right. And then he saw her, Tasha. She was tying another little girl's shoelaces, nodding along to the beat, smiling like the world hadn't tried to break her 5 times over. She noticed him standing there, and without hesitation, she walked out. No fear, no apology, no performance, just presence. They stood on the sidewalk, facing each other. Two people from different planets, sharing the same patch of cracked concrete. Langston spoke first. Is he happy here? Tasha tilted her head slightly, surprised by the softness in his voice. He's not here for me to make him happy, she said simply. He's here so he can remember what he feels like when no one's trying to fix him. Langston blinked. That hit harder than he expected. He cleared his throat. I didn't know he could move like that. Tasha smiled gently. Most people don't. Because they never let him try. There was no judgment in her voice, but he felt it anyway in his bones. I'm his father, he said, as if trying to remind himself. I've done everything. Private schools, doctors, equipment. I believe you, she said. I also think maybe that's not what he needed most. Langston looked away. I didn't want him to feel less than, I thought, if I could just make his world easier. You made it efficient, Tasha interrupted. Gently, but not easier. And definitely not freer. That word freer lingered between them. Langston stared at the studio behind her, the cracked floors, the peeling paint, and inside, his son was dancing again. Not for approval, just because I don't know how to talk to him. Langston admitted quietly. I always say the wrong thing, or too much, or nothing at all. Tasha nodded slowly. Maybe start by letting him teach you something. Langston raised an eyebrow. He's 10. She smiled. Exactly. He stood there in silence. Langston Holt, the man who commanded boardrooms, who signed billion-dollar deals with a pen stroke, found himself taking advice from a woman whose name he hadn't even asked the first time he saw her. But something in her steadiness made him listen. She didn't try to impress him. She didn't flinch at his status. She just stood. And in doing so, made him realize he'd been building walls around his son when all the boy really needed was a door. I'll be back tomorrow, Langston said, almost uncertainly. Not to interfere. Just to be there. Tasha gave a soft nod. You'd be surprised how much that means. He turned to leave, then paused, and looked back at her. What's your name? She smiled. Tasha. Tasha, he repeated, as if the syllables weighed more now. Thank you. She nodded again. Don't thank me yet. He smiled, almost a flicker of something unfamiliar on his face, and then he walked away, not like a man who was in control, but like one who had just learned how much he had missed by trying to be. Langston arrived 5 minutes early. No driver. No phone in his hand. No suit today. Just a navy sweater, jeans that hadn't been worn in months, and sneakers that still squeaked with every step. He sat on the old wooden bench in the corner of the studio. No one stared. No one whispered. Eli glanced at him just once, then turned back to the group. That was okay. Langston didn't come to be seen. He came to see. The music started. Simple. Playful. The children moved around the room like falling leaves, some clumsy, some bold. And there in the middle, as always, was Tasha. Not commanding, just inviting. Eli stood with one hand resting on the ballet bar, waiting for his cue. Tasha caught his eye, gave a tiny nod, and he stepped forward. Slow, measured, focused. Langston watched, chest tight. He remembered this movement in a different room, with a different tone. Back then, every step was a test, a metric, a target. Now, it was something else, expression. And when Tasha spun gently in front of Eli, offering him her hand, Langston held his breath. Eli took it and led. The room faded. Langston didn't hear the music, didn't see the other kids. He just saw his boy dancing. Not because he was told, not because he was pushed, but because someone believed he could. After class, the kids rushed for their shoes. Parents chatted. Laughter filled the air. Langston stayed on the bench, still, hands clasped, unsure, until he saw Eli walking toward him slowly. But without help, the boy stopped a few feet away. His eyes didn't quite meet Langston's. "I saw you," Eli mumbled. "Today?" Langston cleared his throat. "You were incredible." Eli shrugged one shoulder, his way of deflecting praise. Langston stood, unsure what to do with his hands. Then, almost without thinking, he said, "Do you think, next time, you could show me one of the moves?" Eli's eyes flicked up. "You want to dance?" Langston smiled. "Maybe. I'd probably fall over. Though," Eli was quiet. "Then, you don't have to be good. You just have to try." The words were familiar. Langston turned to see Tasha leaning against the doorway, smiling. She had said that days ago, and now Eli was repeating them, like they were his own. He looked at his son. "Then I guess I'll try." That night, they didn't go home immediately. They stopped for ice cream at a little stand 2 blocks from the studio. No bodyguard, no plan, just the two of them. Sitting on a bench, Eli licked his cone and said nothing. Langston didn't push conversation, until Eli looked up and asked softly, "Are you going to come back?" Langston paused, then nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I think I need to." At home that night, Langston sat at the piano. It hadn't been played in years. He opened the lid, touched a single key, soft, unsteady, out of tune, but still music, still possible, just like them. Langston couldn't sleep. Not that night. Not after seeing his son lead a dance. Then lead a moment. Then lead him. He sat alone in the study. Lights dimmed. The city glowing faintly behind the windows. Everything around him was immaculate custom shelves. Untouched books. Art that no one in the house had ever really looked at. But inside, chaos. For the first time in years, Langston wasn't planning or managing. He was feeling, and what he felt was shame, not the kind that shows on your face, the kind that lives in your silence. He had built empires. He had rescued companies. He had controlled everything, except connection. He picked up a photo frame from his desk. Ellie, age 4, stiff, serious, already guarded. Langston stared at the photo and whispered aloud, "Was I always this far away?" No one answered, but his own memory did. He remembered the hospital, the doctor's voice, the pamphlets, the possibilities. "Your son may never walk," they'd said, and all Langston heard was, "You've already failed." He remembered holding Eli so small and vowing, "I'll fix it. I'll fix you." But Eli didn't need to be fixed. He needed to be held, to be heard, to be met where he was. And Langston had missed it all. The next morning, he made 2 phone calls. One to his assistant, "Clear my calendar every Wednesday at 4. No exceptions." The other to the studio. "Hi," he said awkwardly when Tasha picked up. "It's Langston Holt. I was wondering if—" "You're already on the list," she said gently. "We made a spot for you." He exhaled. "Thank you." She paused, then added, "You're doing more than showing up. You know, you're staying. That matters." He nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "I'm trying." A week later, Langston sat in a quiet meeting with the studio's director and Tasha. "I'd like to sponsor the movement program," he said. "Renovate the space. Pay the staff. Create scholarships." The director blinked. "That's generous." Langston looked at Tasha. "Eli's not the only one who needs a place like this." And I've spent too long building things that don't make people feel like they matter. He reached into his folder and pulled out a proposal not from a consultant, but written in his own handwriting. Title: The Freedom Project. Goal: to create safe spaces where children with disabilities, regardless of background, can move and be moved. At the bottom, one line was underlined. We don't need to lead them. We just need to follow. That night, Eli joined him in the living room. They didn't talk much, but for the first time, Langston didn't try to steer the moment. He just sat, listened, let silence be enough. Then Eli asked, "Dad, why are you smiling?" Langston looked at his son, really looked, and said, "Because I'm finally learning how to dance." Weeks passed, and Wednesdays became sacred. Langston no longer came to the studio with hesitation. He came with intention. Sometimes he danced. Sometimes he watched. Sometimes he simply sat beside Eli, their knees touching, their silence comfortable. And Tasha, she kept showing up the same way she always had. Quiet, steady, kind. But one evening, after class, Langston lingered. Tasha was wiping down mirrors. The music had stopped. The kids had gone. "Hey," he said softly. She turned, surprised to see him still there. "I realized something today," he began. "I've said thank you a dozen times, maybe more, but not properly." She tilted her head. "You don't need to." "I do." He walked toward her, holding something in his hand, a small envelope. Nothing fancy, no logo, no gold trim, just her name, Tasha. She took it, cautiously, opened it. Inside, a single sheet of paper, handwritten. "You didn't just give my son confidence. You gave me a second chance to be his father, and you did it without fanfare, without credit, without ever making me feel small for what I didn't know. The world often looks at people like you and forgets to say the one thing that matters most. I see you. I see the way you look at every child like they matter. I see the strength in your quiet, the clarity in your stillness. You taught my son how to lead by letting him, and you taught me how to follow. Thank you." Langston. Tasha read it once, then again. She folded the letter carefully, not because it was delicate, but because it meant something no paycheck ever had. She looked up, her eyes a little wet. "I didn't do anything special." Langston smiled. "You didn't need to." They stood in silence, and for the first time, she was the one being seen, not as the waitress, not as the helper, but as the soul that helped someone come home without ever leaving the room. A few months later, the studio had a new name, The Freedom Room, sponsored anonymously, painted with soft colors, filled with movement, laughter, and something else. Permission to try, to fail, to feel. Eli danced every Wednesday, sometimes with Tasha, sometimes with his father, sometimes alone, but always with joy. If this story moved something in you even just a little, leave a comment and tell us who's the person in your life that helped you feel seen. We read every single one. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, real moments, quiet heroes, unexpected turns, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who might need it today. Because sometimes the smallest stories leave the biggest marks, and we're just getting started.